So thank you all so much for joining us. Tonight, best-selling author Steve Berry will discuss his new thriller, The Medici Return. I'm sure I butchered that. I tried it. I tried practicing that 5 times, Steve. The Medici Return, a Cotton Malone novel. In this installment of Author Hour in Massachusetts. So he needs no introduction, but Steve Berry is the New York Times and #1 internationally best-selling author of 19 Cotton Malone novels, 5 standalone thrillers, 2 Luke Daniels adventures, and several works of short fiction. He has over 26 million books in print, translated into 41 languages. With his wife Elizabeth, he is the founder of History Matters, an organization dedicated to historical preservation. He serves as an emeritus member of the Smithsonian Libraries Advisory Board and was a founding member of International Thriller Writers, formerly serving as its co-president. Oh my goodness. So folks, those watching live and the many more that will watch the recording, let's give a big virtual round of applause to Steve for joining us here tonight. And Steve, you can take it away. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I sympathize with your wrestling with the name. Uh, a lot of Americans call it Medici. And I called it Medici myself until I started writing this book, and I went to Italy a couple of times, and I got corrected very quickly over there. They're very quick to say that it's Medici. It took me a while too. So I sympathize with the struggle with it. This book was a lot of fun to write. It was the 19th Cotton Malone adventure. Don't let that put you off, though. Those of you who've never read me before, you don't have to read the other 18 books and before you read this book. Each one of the books in the series can be read on its own. They can be read in any order. They can be picked up anywhere. You can start with this one and go backwards. I write the books to make sure that you're able to do that. This book was born in a very interesting way. I had gone to Tuscany for the first time. I had never been to Tuscany before. We went in the summer of 2022. We were invited to go over to Tuscany, to Florence, and then to the Palio, the big race that is held in Siena every July and then again in August. I'd never heard of the Palio. I really knew nothing about it. I had never been to Florence. I knew very little about the whole region, but I spent a few months and I did my reading, got myself kind of somewhat knowledgeable about certain things. And I went over and spent about 10 days in Tuscany. And along the way, sure enough, a novel found me. And I always say it that way because you never find a novel. You never go looking for an idea. If you do go looking for an idea, you're never going to find it, I guarantee you. They are very elusive. They hide. They stay completely out of sight, and they do not alert you to where they are. But every once in a while, they will find you. And in this case, the novel found me. It was during a bus ride. We were riding back from Siena to our hotel, and it occurred to me, a whole idea occurred to me, this whole concept of the Medici, who were probably the most preeminent family in the Renaissance time, certainly the wealthiest family in Renaissance time. Their wealth rivaled that of kings and queens and emperors. They had their hands in everything. They were stretched all over Europe. They were very well politically connected, and for around 1200 till 1741, the Medici controlled Florence. Up until the early part of the 16th century, they controlled it simply by being in control. They just controlled the politicians, they controlled the government. Finally, in the early part of the 16th century, they were able to convince the Pope to grant them a duchy and to make Tuscany a duchy and to grant them the rule of that duchy as the Dukes of Tuscany. And so from around 1513 to 1741, the Medici ruled Florence as their duke. The family, incredibly, went extinct in 1741. There were 2 branches of the family. There were the royal side and the non-royal side. The non-royal side is not really relevant to this story because they did not have any connection. They didn't have the power. They didn't have the money. So it's the royal side that we look at, the ones who became the side of the family that became the Dukes of Tuscany and ruled that country. Um, and towards the end, when they were getting to the end, the last three heirs who were eligible to become Duke, some very strange things happened. The first one was killed, so he never made it anywhere. The second one ascended to the Duke and became the Duke of Tuscany, but he was a very uh, not a very good person. I guess that's the best way to put it. He was a very poor leader, very poor person, very poor personality. He was married, but he despised his wife. He basically spent his time eating and drinking. He never had any children. He died childless, and all that was left at that point was one more heir. Her name was Anna, and Anna was female. And in that time, females could not inherit. Her father, who had been Duke, wanted her desperately to become to rule the country. She was very wise, she was very smart. She could have done a great job, but the male politicians had a much different idea. And when she died in 1741, the Medici went away. They just vanished. But a thought occurred to me. What if that wasn't the case? What if there actually was one last Medici out there? Um, I actually wanted to call the book The Last Medici, but I already have a book called The Last Kingdom, so I couldn't do that. So I thought about it. I said, what would happen? And then I said, well, okay, who cares if there's a last Medici? What does it matter? Then I came up with this whole concept because the Medici were the bankers to the Pope. They were the bankers to the Vatican. They had their hands in the Vatican very deeply. Three Medici became Pope. There were three Medici popes. And it occurred to me that what if there was a little more going on there? What if that duchy that was granted, there was some ulterior motive to that? What if there's some more to this? And so was born the Medici Return. I went while I was there to Siena and saw the Palio, the great horse race that has been held there for 500 years. It was I will say, one of the most incredible spectacles that you'll ever witness. If you get a chance, go see it. Go watch it. It's well worth it. It is the Kentucky Derby with no rules. Even though there are some rules, there are about 100 rules that govern the race. There are only two that are really relevant. No rider can interfere with the other rider's reins. And what that means is you can't hit the rider, kick him, knock him off the horse, or anything like that. If you do that, you'll be disqualified. Second rule is you cannot conspire with another rider to make or allow someone to win the race, but you can conspire with someone else to have someone lose the race. And that's where it comes in, and that's where it all comes together. It's a race of 90 seconds around the square in Siena. 30,000 people are in the center of the square, and the horses go around them. It happens in a blink of an eye. There is bribery, there is deceit, there is all kinds of things. You can bump into each other, you can block a horse, you can do everything short of touching the other rider. And believe me, they do. It is an amazing race where conspiracies are put together and everything is formulated. You can watch all this happening as it's going on because it's happening right there in front of you. It is governed by the 17 contradas of Siena, which are basically 17 neighborhoods. Only 10 of the contradas can participate in the race. They are determined by lots that are chosen. If you participate in the July race, you are then ineligible for the other seven are the first picks for the August race, and then they fill up the other three slots with people who had raced previously. There's a point made that every contrada races at least once a year. There is great pride in it. The neighborhoods take huge amount of pride in the race. Winning the race is everything, and the only thing you really win is this silk palio, which is a sacred thing that is made each year by an artist. It is taken to the cathedral. It is blessed by the bishop. I watched that. They're crying. There's emotion going on. The palio is very, very, very emotional moment. And winning it is just about bragging rights. And it was an incredible spectacle. And I noticed in the race that there was a rider on one of the horses who was 46, 47 years old. So it occurred to me, why can't Cotton run in the race? So that's what happens. Cotton gets to race in the palio. And it was a fun to put that whole sequence together. I watched the race from a third story window in one of the villas that encircle the square, which is a good place to watch from. And if you do go, try to make arrangements to get one of those. Um, I had a lady behind me who had lived there all her life, and she knew all about the race. And I told her, don't stop talking. Tell me every single thing that's happening as it's happening. Explain it as a running commentary. And she gave me the running commentary, and it was amazing. I incorporated all that into the novel, so you're going to get to experience the palio too. The book was a lot of fun to write. It was a lot of fun to put together. It's one of the most beautiful parts of the world. Florence is one of the most amazing cities in the world. You're going to get a good travel log of Florence. You're going to see some amazing things, things that you may have never seen before. You may have not have experienced. Maybe it'll get you excited to go over there and see for yourself. Even the hotel we stayed at is in the novel. I added it into the novel, is there. So Cotton goes to all of these places. It's a good story. It's a fun story. It's a little bit evolution story as Cotton moves along. Those of you who read the last novel knows there was a little bit of surprise at the end of that book. And he's beginning to deal with that surprise. He'll deal with it again a little more next year. And then in 2027, he's going to really deal with that and face it head on. These are things that are coming down the road. Um, I'm working on that 2026 novel right now and conceptualizing the 27, 28 novel. So there's a lot going to happen in Cotton's world over the next 3 to 4 years. I'm going to change it up a little bit. Some things are going to get a little different. We've been going on 19 books now. It's almost 20 years. You got to keep things fresh for me. I got to keep things fresh for you. So some things are going to be happening in Cotton's world as things evolve there. So that's really what I came to tell you about the book. I think I want to explain it as best I could without giving anything away, and I haven't given away anything. There's several really interesting surprises in the novel that should catch you off guard. I hope it does. So with that, Robert, can we open it up? Let's take some questions and see what's on everybody's mind.
Excellent. So, Steve, no one wants to see me, so let me make sure I spotlight you for everyone. Okay, there we go. All
There we
right,
go.
so folks, yes, folks, if you have any questions, now's the time to get them into the Q&A. Try to get them into the Q&A box, but I'll also keep my eye on the chat box. All right, we've already got 8 questions here. Okay, so
Okay.
Steve, Leandra wants to know, this is not a book-related question. The last time I saw you in New York City, your wife mentioned she gets a new pair of lovely shoes for accompanying you on your book tours. Has she selected her pair for this year yet?
No, she doesn't get the shoes for coming on the book tour. She gets her shoes for her editorial skills. My wife owns a publishing company, Blue Box Press, and she's had 3 number 1 bestsellers in the country. That small boutique press has had 3 number 1 sellers. She publishes around 25 books a year between her novellas and the novels that they do. She's a quite accomplished editor. She's the first reader of my novels. So when I'm done with the book and I'm completely finished, I give it to her, and no one has read it, and neither have I told her anything about the book. I keep the plot specifically away from her so that when she reads it, she will have a fresh eye. She can read it with a fresh eye, and she's not biased in any way. And we have a deal. If she finds something in the book, and I'm not talking about typos or something like that, I'm talking about a plot flaw, an inconsistency. Guy's dead here, he's alive here, he's dead again. That kind of thing that kind of comes through the editing process, and you make mistakes. And there's always something like that in a manuscript. I try as hard as I can to get them out. But if she finds them, she gets purses and shoes. Yes, she does. I'm proud to say that she did not get any purses and shoes for this book. I was able to find everything, and she did not discover anything.
So Dottie asks, given your connection with the Smithsonian, did you start as a historian or did you always want to be a writer?
Well, I'm not really an historian. I'm an amateur historian. I'm a guy that reads 300 to 400 books on one subject. And so I get kind of knowledgeable about that one subject after you deal with 300, 400 books there. So I started as a reader is what I started at. And then I started writing 35 years ago, but it took me 12 years to get published. From the day I wrote my first word to the day I sold my first word was 12 years. I wrote 8 manuscripts over that 12-year period. 5 went to New York houses. They were rejected 85 times. I made it the 86th time 12 years after I started, and that was in 2003. So now we're in the 22nd year of me being published.
So Shannon asks, Steve, with your interest in history preservation, in your opinion, what is the area of history you are most worried about its preservation in today's current political, environmental, and economic state? Are any of your books focused on this area that you can recommend some background information on this topic?
I haven't focused on that aspect of it. I would say that historical preservation in this country as a whole is a very precarious situation. That's why we started History Matters, the foundation we have. We help local communities raise money for their historic preservation projects, and we've been doing that now for this is the 16th year that we've done it. We've raised several $1 million for those endeavors, and we've learned along the way that money for historical preservation just simply doesn't exist in this country. You have to do it privately. You have to create it privately. It has to be found privately. It's very difficult. Governments do not get into that process very much. And because of that, we have an enormous amount of stuff at risk all across this country. Yes, we do. The reason why I started History Matters was a guy, I was at an archive about 17 years ago. And the archivist told me something that really struck home with me. He said, in this room here are millions of documents, millions of pages of documents are in this room. And every second of every day, the ink somewhere on one of them fades away. Every day, every second, that ink is fading away. And eventually, they'll all be gone. They'll just be gone. And that's kind of struck me. I said, I never really thought about that really, that they could just fade away. And so that's what kind of got me going with History Matters and wanting to do my part in trying to do preservation. And being on the Smithsonian was a lot of fun because they do a lot of that. But we actually help raise money for the Smithsonian's historic preservation projects.
I guess the head of the National Archives was relieved of her duties last week, so we'll see. We'll see what comes of that. Roma asks, "Do you think you need more women writers in your genre?"
Oh, I would probably say yes. I would think female thriller writers are a rare breed, to be honest with you. They're not as many as there are male writers. That has been that way for a long, long time. So the romanticy genre that has been created and is now kind of ruling the list is a form of a thriller. It is a thriller. It's a form of a thriller. And it's great to see that. And I know when I was with ITW, we pushed very hard to get as many women as we could to get into the thriller business. I'd love to see more of that.
Larry asks, Steve, how long does it typically take you to write a novel from start to finish?
Well, the whole process from start to finish is about 18 months. Now, there's an overlap there. I'm writing a book, and about 6 months before I finish this book, I start researching the next book. So I'm writing this one and researching that one simultaneously so that when I finish this one, I can start the other one the next day. Because I have to do a book a year, I have to stay on that process. So once I get started, I get going, but I keep doing the research. So the writing itself is about a 12-month process. The research is about an 18-month process, but the writing overlaps into that. So at all times, there are 3 books in my brain. Right now, I'm writing 2026, I'm plotting and researching 27, and I'm conceptualizing 28. There's 3 in my brain at all times, and that's been going on now for 35 years. I won't say that my brain's not a little tired from it, but that's just what I've trained myself to do. So it's kind of second nature for me now. But that's how the process works for me because I stay on that book a year schedule.
And you're promoting 25, so that's even 4 books.
Yeah, well, that's it. Well, that's true. We're actually dealing with that, promoting 25, right?
Yeah. Francine, just to clarify, you kind of touched on this earlier, but Francine is very honest. And Steve, Francine is one of the few people in the world who has not read any of your books.
Okay.
And she just wants to know, is this, if she hasn't read any Cotton Malone books, is she okay to start with this one, or should she start from the beginning?
No, no, she can start with this one. As I said earlier, I do not write the books where you have to read them in any particular order. If you were to read them in order, you might notice a few things. But if you don't read them in order, those things are not going to bother you. You're not going to really know what they are. You're not even going to pay attention to them. So I'm very careful with that. The trick to writing a book series is that every book in the series has to be the same but different. See the trick? Same but different. Not same, same, not different, different. Same but different. How are my books the same? You have Cotton Malone, you have Cassiopeia, you have Stephanie Nell, you have Action, History, Secrets, Conspiracies. That's what's same. What's different in every book is the history, the thing from the past that's still relevant today, the antagonist, the bad guy, the motivations, the settings and locales are different. So I would say start with the Medici Return, be a great way to start. And then once we get you hooked, go back and read them. You can go to my website, steveberry.org, and take a look at all of the books and decide which part of history you like best, because they're all different. You may find a particular subject matter that you find really intriguing. For example, The Lost Order is a book that deals with the Smithsonian, which is very interesting. There's all kinds of things that you can look there and find the one that you like the best to start with. But if you don't, then start with this one.
Peggy asks, how did growing up in Georgia affect your approach to writing?
I don't know if it had really any effect one way or the other on me. I know Cotton comes from there and it has his roots there. So the little bit of Cotton rubbed off there. But I don't think it had much effect one way or the other. I grew up in Atlanta, then I moved to St. Mary's, Georgia, which is a small town down on the coast. And I lived there for 30 years and practiced law there. So I don't think, being in the small town, I will say this is a good time to talk about something interesting. We have another book coming out this July, on July the 11th, and this one does have relevance to Georgia and all. It's a book about a lawyer in a small South Georgia town who gets caught up in a conspiracy that begins to threaten his life, and people want him dead. He's dealing with a company that has a very unique way of controlling its cost, and he gets caught up in this thing. It's a suspense thriller like a David Baldacci, John Grisham, or a Harlan Coben book. I wrote it 34 years ago. It was the second manuscript I ever wrote in my life. It sat in a drawer till 2020, and during the lockdown, I took it out and rewrote it and brought it up to date and fixed it with all the things I'd learned over those years. And Grand Central bought it, and it's coming out July the 11th. It's called The List. And this one does have a great effect in Georgia. There's a lot in the book that's autobiographical to me.
So speaking of Georgia, another Georgia question. Adam asks, out of all the towns in Georgia, how did you decide Cotton would be from Thomasville?
No, he's not from Thomasville. He's from there's a little bit of a connection with Thomasville with his family, but he lives up in Middle Georgia in Vidalia is where he lives. There's a little bit of Thomasville connection in the early book there, but then he grew up on his grandfather's onion farm up in Vidalia, Georgia, in Middle Georgia. So that's where I put him, and that's where he came. That's where he came from. Thomasville does appear in one of the books. It was not. I went to school in Valdosta, so I knew exactly where that is.
Do I need to start fact checking these questions, Steve? Okay, let's see.
No, it's okay. I know he's referring to at Thomasville, but Cotton actually lives in Middle Georgia, or did live in Middle Georgia. His mother still lives there.
So Adam has another question. He asks, would you ever consider using readers' names as characters in future novels? And I guess as a follow-up, how do you come up with the character names?
I don't use readers' names. I use people I know's names. In this case, for example, in this book, Eric Castleberry is a neighbor. Cardinal Jason Richter is a neighbor. Thomas Dewberry is a neighbor. Stephen Giamenta is a neighbor. So yes, I use a lot of them. They're good sports, and I make sure they're okay with everything. And I've used a lot of people that I know and around here, as names are in there. I tell them it's not the greatest compliment in the world because you're most likely going to die, most likely. Um, to me, the best character to be is the bad guy. You know, that's the most fun to be. I tell them that it's not, I have a disclaimer. I say, now look, this character is not you. It doesn't look like, act like, talk like, or in any way reflect you, except that he shares your name. But you're not the only one in the world with that name. So he just shares that name with you. And folks are very, have a lot of fun with it. I like to do it with people I know. So, strangers, I don't know them. I don't know how they'll react to it. And I don't want to get in trouble.
So we're avoiding spoilers, but I have to ask this question, okay? Rebecca wants to know, are we going to see more of Danny Daniels and or Danny and Stephanie in the future?
Yeah, oh, yeah, of course. I mean, Danny comes back in next year's book. He'll be in next year's novel. He comes in and out of the stories. Whether he'll be a focus of a story again, maybe, I don't know. I've kind of used him, so many times. It's time to freshen it up a little bit. It's time to freshen the series up with some new folks and new things. And so that's what you're going to see happening over the next three to 4 years.
So Janine says, you are one of the few authors both my husband and I enjoy reading, so we share your novels.
Great.
And her question is, do you personally visit the locations where the novels take place? Your descriptions are always very detailed.
Yes, I do. There's only two exceptions to that. I did not go to China for the Emperor's Tomb, but a friend of mine did, so he told me all about it. And I did not go to Antarctica for the Charlemagne pursuit. Those are the only two exceptions to it. But other than that, I've been there. All the locales of this novel, yeah, I was right there. I was right there in every one of them. So the locations in my novels become characters. They literally are part of the story. That's another reason why it would be very expensive to make a movie or a series out of one of my books because you've got to go to these places. You can't fake it. You got to go to Florence. You got to go to the Medici Chapel. You got to go to these places and put it there because those places are very, very important. At a minimum, you got to build a replica, but it seems easier to go there. The Palio, you'd have to have a horse race. You've got to create a Palio and have it. All of that is part of the novel. And so, yes, all of my stories, I make it very clear because that I want you to really feel like you're there, and I want you to go and see these places for yourself.
By the way, I neglected to mention this at the beginning, but we have folks tuning in from all over the world tonight. We have someone from Canada. We also have someone from England, where I imagine it's very late. So we appreciate all our attendees, but especially those who are from near and far. So Brian, so you walked us through your sort of 18-month process, a little more granular. Brian wants to know, how many hours a day do you typically spend writing?
I go, I start about 7 o'clock and I go to 11 and then I take about an hour off and then I come back and go to about 2:33. I do 6 to 7 hours each day. And that's 5 days a week because this is a job. I have to deliver my manuscript on time. The number one thing that a commercial fiction writer has to do, and it's not even open to debate. You have to deliver your manuscript on time. I've never come near a deadline. I've never come within 60 days of a deadline. So, I mean, I've never even gotten close to the end. Usually I deliver about 4 months early. So, uh, I stay on that schedule to do my 1,000 words a day. If I want to work on the weekends, I do. If I don't feel bad about it. But during the week, got to work. Got to go in there, go to work every day. And it's a job. My job is to produce that manuscript, and I don't have an infinite amount of time to do that. So if there's a discipline to writing, everyone has their own discipline. I'm a morning person, so that's what works for me. I know like Diana Gabaldon works in the middle of the night. She works from midnight to 5 a.m. because that's her most productive time for her brain. You have to do what works for you. You've got to find when you're most productive, and then you have to set the time out and do it. And I've been doing that now for 35 years.
Denise wants to know, when did you stop practicing law?
I stopped in December of 2008. I did my very last divorce I was a trial lawyer, so I did a lot of criminal defense, divorces, all kinds of things in court. Did my very last divorce on around the 22nd of December, 2008. I remember standing there. The judge ruled. It was all over. I looked up at the court and I knew the judge for years. I said, I'm done. That's it. That was my last one. I don't have enough. I don't have any more done. I'd done about 10,000 divorces over those time. And I said, I'm done. So I haven't practiced law now going on 16 years, 16 and a half years. I'm always asked, do I miss it? No, not really. I did it for 30 years. I gave it all I had, and I moved on to something else.
So Rebecca and John have similar questions. John asks, how competitive is it to get Scott Brick to do your audiobooks? His character interpretation mastery is amazing. And Rebecca asks, how closely do you work with Scott Brick to produce the audiobooks, and what is that process like?
Well, what happens is the manuscript's given to Scott. He goes through it. If he has any pronunciation questions, like he's not sure how a person's name is said, he will email me and I will help. I will give him the pronunciation, but particularly if it's characters like Eric Castleberry, that you got to say it the right way. You got to do it correctly. And that usually he get 99% of the time he gets it right. He's extremely good. I picked Scott to do my books years ago, and I've been very fortunate that I've had him done all my books. I've been very, very fortunate there. So I'm very pleased with him. He does a tremendous job. He does a great job with it. We had only one issue along the way. It was very interesting because in the beginning, Scott tried to give Cotton a Southern accent. And he gave him this Southern accent. And if you listen to the early books, the Alexandria Link, the Venetian Betrayal, those you'll hear that. There's a Southern accent. And I told him one day when I got to meet him, and I got to know him very well, I said, Scott, the Southern accent, I just wouldn't do that. I think the protagonist of a novel should be your voice, just your voice. You are the protagonist. You speak like you speak. Everyone else can have inflection and accent, but not the protagonist. And then you'll see he stopped, and he stopped doing that. And I think he does that now on every book he does. I think he does that on all of them. We were very fortunate. He and I won an Audie in 2014 for the Patriot Threat. That's the best audio thriller of the year, which was kind of cool. And he did a great job of bringing that to life. And that was the first time that we did what's called the author's cut. And what happened in that book is at the end of each chapter, I came on for about 30 seconds and told you something about that chapter that you didn't know. And then I did that for about halfway to three-quarters of the way through the book. And then I stopped because towards the end, I don't want to come in. If you don't want to hear my comments, we gave you two versions, one with them and one without. So you get past it. But we did that for about 4 or 5 audio books. But the first one we did was the Patriot Threat, and it won the Audie, which is like the Academy Award for audio books, which was kind of fun. So Scott did a great job with that.
Oh, interesting. So Randall has a comment and a question. Normally, I don't mention last names, but in this case, it's relevant. Randall's last name is Falk. And Randall says, Steve, you asked me about my last name once when signing a book for me. Lo and behold, the name was in your next book. That's so cool. And then Randall wants to know, do you have a writer you truly love to read and that you follow? So, Steve, who's your biggest author crush? Who do you love to read?
Well, don't tell him I said this, because if he hears I said this, he'll get the big head. So we'll keep it between us. But I like James Rollins stuff. I mean, Jim's a friend of mine. I love his stuff. So I do read his books each year. Yes, I do. He's probably the only one I read each year. Occasionally, I'll read a Cussler book. Sometimes a Reacher book, sometimes a Baldacci book, but I don't get to read more than 3 or 4 fiction books a year because just no time. Because I'm reading 300 to 400 books of research. I noticed recently that Dan Brown's coming out with a new book in September the 9th, and he's sort of the king of our genre, so I'll make sure to read that book. But I always make a point to read Jim's book, and he was very nice. He dedicated Not this book, but the one before. He dedicated the book to me, which was very nice. And what I did for him is in the Warsaw Protocol, the president of Poland is James Czechowski, and that's Jim's real name, James Czechowski. So he was the president of Poland in my story.
Well, someone in the chat is claiming that Jim is also a big fan of yours and reads all your books.
Well, he's like me. He won't admit that either.
Okay.
You're not going to admit that either, but I think he does read them, and he knows I read it. I
There
have
we
a,
go.
you'll see right over my shelf right here. See that?
Yeah.
That's all Jim Rollins books right there.
Oh, there you go. That's the proof.
There's a whole row of them right there. Every one of them right there. Signed, by the way, too.
There we go. So Alan says, as an aspiring writer, I have noticed that it's getting harder and harder to get a reader's attention with shorter attention spans, shorter sentences where John Steinbeck uses longer sentences and uses a little more advanced language. Have you noticed this? Do you have any advice about how to deal with this? That's something I struggle with. Just curious.
Oh no, it's a clear you have to have short sentences, short words, short paragraphs, short chapters. Absolutely. Uh, in my genre anyway, in the thriller genre. Other genres, if you're writing historical fiction, that's not necessarily the case. But in the thriller business, the object of the game is to keep the eye moving down the page. You got to keep that eye moving at all times. It never hesitates, it never stops, it never gets bogged down. You keep that eye moving. So you'll see in my books, I have my average sentence length's about 10 words. I don't use any big words that you got to go look up in the dictionary what they mean. That's aggravating to a reader. My paragraphs are about this long at the most. Sometimes, every once in a while, that long, but very rarely, mostly two fingers, the two finger rule. Um, Hemingway started this. He's the one that fundamentally altered American fiction, starting to write this way. But in today's style, Hemingway's verbose. He's a little verbose in today's style, but Hemingway didn't have the internet to fight with. He didn't have all that other stuff to fight with. So, but he's changed the way American novels were written, and then we've taken it even further. So, if you're going to write a thriller, it better be fast. It better be pacey. You've got to keep things going. Things have to happen at all times, and it better thrill. It better thrill, or you're going to be in big trouble.
Alan had another question. Have you ever considered publishing one of your first novels? If so, what are some of those titles and what are they about?
Well, all of them kind of made it, to be honest with you. Of the 8 manuscripts, the first one, no, it's still sitting right over here in a cabinet right behind me, right over there. It's the only manuscript I kept. It's about this tall. It's terribly written because I didn't know what I was doing, but it's a pretty good story, and I might rewrite it one day. The second one, the list, is going to come this July, July the 11th. The third one was the third secret. The fourth one was The Amber Room, which got published. It was my first published book. The fifth one was a British thriller that did not make it, but it made it into a very long novella that I wrote called The Tudor Plot. So it was a terrible novel, but it made for a great novella and came together. The rest of that book, I kind of stole the scenes and used it in other places. The next one was The Kaiser's Web, which made it into print a few years ago. And then the last one did not make it, but I've stolen about 90% of it and used it in other books. So just about all those words did make it. So there's a lesson to be learned there for writers out there. Don't throw your words away. You can make them work. You just got to wait for the right time and the right moment. They'll need some work and polish, but don't toss them away. So I was very fortunate to get to use just about all those words.
So Marie has a comment and then a question. Marie says, I have read already 1/3 of this book. I'm totally engrossed. She says, we miss you here on Amelia Island. Steve, thanks for writing about one of our favorite places in the world. Thank you for your wonderful books. And Marie wants to know, what has been your reader's reaction to Luke Daniels?
First off, Marie, good to see you. To hear from you. Marie and I ran and organized the Amelia Book Island Festival for a number of years. So we worked together for several years on that festival. She's a marvelous organizer. She took that festival from really bankruptcy and made it a very profitable endeavor and made it very, very well. She was a joy to work with. And I loved being involved in that at the time. Luke Daniels has been a good response to Luke. He really has. The two books did very well. The Ninth Man and Red Star Falling did very well. Luke's had fun. There'll be a third one coming in 2027. We're working on that now. It's going to be a fun story because it's going to deal with Disney, which is going to be a lot of fun. Disney, a thriller involving Disney, which is going to be very interesting. Walt Disney, particularly himself. And Luke's going to get caught up in an adventure that involves Walt Disney. So we're working on that now. Grant Blackwood writes those books with me, and we do those together. We've done three. Who knows? There may be more down the road, but we're going to get through three first and see where we stand.
Steve, what's it like having a co-author? How does the division of labor work there?
Well, the way we do it, I don't expect Grant to know every detail about Luke Daniels. He didn't create him. He'd have to study every book in great detail. So what I told him, I said, Grant, just write it. Just write a draft. I come up with the ideas. I kind of conceptualize it. Though the third book I gave Grant had a lot more latitude in coming up with what he wanted to do. I gave him the idea about Disney and everything. And we kind of roughly go through the plot a little bit, but I say, you're not married to that. Go wherever you need to go. And then he writes the first draft all the way through. He writes the whole story. Then he gives it to me and I rewrite it. I basically take it and rewrite it and put it in my voice. I work it into my voice. I told him, I said, it's going to be too hard for you to worry about trying to write in my voice. Just get it down. I'll fix it. It takes me about 4 months, 3, 4 months to rewrite it. And between the two of us, we create a novel. So it's truly a little bit of him and a little bit of me. Truly is.
Interesting. So Adam wants to know, are there any plans for Cotton to visit Scotland in the future?
Yeah, I would love that. I would love to. I'm going to Scotland this summer, so I'm going to be looking at that. I would love to do a Scottish thriller. Absolutely would love to have one. So that's definitely in the cards, yes.
So speaking of your award-winning audiobooks, Galen wants to know, are there plans for any new author cuts on the audio versions? Those were my favorites.
No, Grand Central hasn't indicated they want to do any of those. So those were done when I was with Macmillan, and Macmillan, was big on those and wanted to do them, but Grand Central hasn't done it, so it hasn't come up. No.
All right, this one's a little silly, but I'm going to ask it anyway.
Okay.
If you could have a dinner party with anyone living or dead, which three people would you pick to eat and visit alongside you?
Well, first off would be James Michener because he's my favorite writer of all time. So I would love to sit down and ask him questions and pick his brain. I loved his books. Right back here over my head, or is a complete collection of Michener's books, save for the first one. I don't have a first edition of Tales of the South Pacific. It's very possible to find. I have a reprint and I have a third. I have a later edition, but I don't have a first edition. But I have all the other books up there. He's my favorite. I'd love to have him there. I would also like Walt Disney to be at dinner. I would love to have Walt Disney at the dinner. And I would like to have Roy Disney at the dinner. I'd like to have Walt and Roy both because there would have been no Walt without Roy and no Roy without Walt. They were really, they went together. So I'd like to have those three. That would be an amazing dinner for me to ask questions. A few years ago, I was given a great honor. Random House was going to reprint all of Michener's books into a trade paperback format. And they asked me to write the introduction. So when you buy those books, my introduction's in the front of all of those books. And it was really cool because now when you go to Amazon to look up a Michener book, it has my name right next to his. And it's really cool. It's the coolest thing because I never got to meet him. I never got to speak to him, but he had great influence on me. Hawaii, which is his novel, is the first adult fiction book I ever read in my life. And it kind of gave me the whole hook for everything. So I owe him a lot. I just never got to speak to him. So that would be a great dinner, really. It'd be a wonderful dinner.
Larry wants to know, are there any other writers in your family?
No, I'm it. I'm it. Got a lot of readers, but no writers.
And I know she's a publisher. You want to brag about your wife a little bit and her accomplishments?
Oh gosh, yeah, she's had enormous success. She's publishes in the romantasy genre, romance and romantasy. And she has Jennifer Armentrout, and they have the Blood and Ash series, which has done very well. It's like I said, they've had 3 number 1 books in the country. out of it. They've got some more coming this year for that series. Um, she's done very well. It's just her and another, there's two partners that are there running the company and doing it. It's a very small operation, but they've had tremendous success. They've sold millions and millions of books and done really, really well.
So we touched on this a little bit with the advice about keeping your sentence structures short, but in general, so an anonymous attendee asks, would you ever consider mentoring a fledgling writer? And do you have any general advice for aspiring writers?
Well, I've taught about 3,000 students around the country as part of our History Matters Foundation, where we do our writers workshop. It's a 4-hour workshop. And that's how we raise money. You buy your way into the workshop with a contribution, and then all that money goes to the project. We don't charge to come, we don't charge expenses, we pay our own way. So everything we raise goes to that. We've raised several $1 million doing it. So I've taught about 3,500 students actually, about that many. Haven't done a seminar in a while. They kind of faded out a little bit. No one's really asked us to do one. Maybe one day we'll do some more of those. I taught at Thriller Fest for many, many years, which is the gathering of the thriller writers every year in New York City. So I've done a lot of teaching and a lot of mentoring, a whole bunch of teaching and a whole bunch of mentoring. The best advice I can give to any writer out there is very simple. Keep writing. Don't stop. You have to write every day. You have to write all the time. There's only one way to learn how to write, and that's to write. And then you have to write some more, then you have to write some more, and you have to write some more. You have to keep writing. You have to keep going. There's no magic here. There's no formula. There's no aha moment. There's no any of that. You learn over a slow, gradual process.
We have an anonymous attendee who says she's your biggest fan. Her last name is Berry, but as far as she knows, there's no relation. But she's your biggest fan. Her and her husband love your books. John writes, do you notice that a lot of lawyers turn into writers? Why is that?
Well, they have a lot of stories. They do. I mean, I have an enormous amount of stories from the practice of law, absolutely. And they normally write legal thrillers that have a legal aspect to it. I did not. I did not want to do that. I wanted to write action, history, secrets, conspiracies. I adhere to the philosophy, do not write what you know. Write what you know is bad advice. It really is. Instead, write what you love. If what you know and what you love are the same thing, great. But for me, it wasn't. I knew the law, but I loved action, history, secrets, conspiracies. And so I went and wrote it. My first novel, I wrote what I knew. And I realized right then I didn't want to do that anymore. I wanted to write what I loved. And so my books were written to escape the practice of law, to escape that, because that's what a thriller is. A good thriller takes you away from reality. We don't want to be too grounded in reality because then it gets depressing for you. We want to take you away from that a little bit. So that was always my goal, is to write something that I could escape away from.
All right, so here comes another mispronunciation for me. Chris asks, is Liz your inspiration for Cassiopeia Vito?
Cassiopeia Vit. Cassiopeia, like the constellation.
Okay.
Cassiopeia. Some people call it, is Cassiopeia is how I pronounce it. Cassiopeia, some people call it that way too. I actually call it a little of both. So either one's fine. I put the I in there so you would say Cassiopeia. I added the I in there for that very reason.
In my defense, I think the reader misspelled the word. But anyway,
Okay.
Steve.
Yeah, it's Cassiopeia or Cassiopeia, either one. And she is based on Elizabeth. Absolutely. Absolutely, she is. She guards her jealously. I was going to eliminate her and break her and Cotton up in the end of the Lincoln myth. I actually did break them up at the end of the Lincoln myth, but she made it very clear that that was not going to happen. She was going to fix that. So I brought it back and together. Now they sort of form a team and they're kind of together and it works out very well. I love the character. She could even have her own book. She could clearly, easily have her own book. No question.
We have another commenter. I didn't read for many years of my life. You were one of the writers that brought me back to the joy of reading, along with Nelson DeMille and Dan Brown. Not bad company.
No, not bad at all. And that's about the greatest compliment you can give a writer right there. Is that
And Oh, I'm sorry.
You got them to read a story. You got them to immerse themselves in that. So that's probably the best compliment. As I say all the time, I'm not going to win the National Book Award. I'm not going to win the Nobel Prize for Literature. I'm not going to win any awards, to be honest with you. They don't give them to thriller writers. They don't give us any awards whatsoever. But if I can entertain you for a little while and make you forget your troubles or forget reality and have some fun in a world where you just immerse yourself and become part of it, then that's the best compliment you can give a writer. That's my reward, really.
Chris asks, what was it like to co-author with MJ Rose?
It was fun. We had a good time. We did 4 novellas, which are Cassiopeia Vit novellas, by the way, and they're out there now. Elizabeth publishes those. They're published through Elizabeth's company, but they can be got. You can get them online. They were fun. We had a good time. You're going to learn a lot more about Cassiopeia's personality or history or background from those novellas. I may put them together, and if you put them all together, they become a book. They become a novel because they're about 30,000 words each. There's 4 of them. That's 120,000 words. That's a novel, basically, is what it would be. So it was an experience. There may be some more down the line. I don't know. I just haven't given that some thought yet, but I'm not saying there won't be.
There was a nice message from Tanya. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but she says, my dad is a big fan of Steve's books and is excited to hear this presentation. They're watching from South Dakota. So thank you, Tanya, for tuning in. So, Steve, we've hit the 7:55 mark here, so we'll slowly start to wind things down. Normally around this time, I ask authors, what are they currently working on? But you've already told us your next 3-year plan. So let us know where can folks find out more about you and follow you online.
Well, you can go to the website, steveberry.org. Everything's there. All the books, everything's laid out. You can learn everything about that. History Matters, all kinds of stuff. Everything's there. So I would encourage them to go there. The Medici Return is in stores now. It's all over the country. Came out yesterday. And so we're in release week. So if you get a chance, pick up a copy or download it, an ebook, however you particularly read your books. And enjoy it. And those of you who've not discovered Cotton Malone, this is a good opportunity. Those of you who are Cotton Malone fans, you're going to come along and see where we're going. As I said, there's a lot going to be happening in Cotton's world over the next 3 to 4 years.
So, folks, let's give Steve a big virtual round of applause for a wonderful discussion. He answered, by my count, roughly 30 questions from the audience. And Steve, did you want to say, I know she wasn't able to make it, did you want to say anything further about your wife and her publishing house?
No, I think I've given her all the praise, and she does a great job. Her and Jillian do a great job. I will say, those of you who don't know it, MJ Rose was one of the partners in that company. There are 3 ladies who ran it: Jillian Stein, my wife, and MJ. But sadly, MJ passed away in December. So now there's only 2 that run the company, and they're going to keep doing a good job. They're going to keep things going, and they're going to have some more #1 bestsellers.
So, folks, look for an email from me in the next 30 minutes with a link to this recording and a link to Wellesley Books to purchase a copy of Steve's latest. Just came out, hit bookstores yesterday. Steve, what an honor, what a pleasure, what a privilege to spend an hour with you. Really appreciate you being so generous with your time during release week. So thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Have a great night, everyone.
Good night.